Hello everyone, thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Remenchik and I am a member of the exhibitions team here at the Brand and creator and moderator of Art Talk Tuesdays. They're not Art Talk Tuesdays, I mean Art Talk at the Brand. I need to edit that. An initiative in which contemporary artists from the Glendale and greater Los Angeles area are invited to discuss their work and the issues that surround it. Followed by a discussion with myself and a public Q&A. This program is free and open to the public. I would like to take a moment to thank the Brand Associates for their generous support of this program. Amie Sillah is a visual artist born in the Bronx, New York, now living and working in Los Angeles. Her practice is lens-based and includes sculpture, performance, and video work. Her work centers on her family's lived experiences immigrating from the Gambia to New York and her relationship with photography as a medium to explore the complexities and diversities of Black diasporic life. Currently in her practice, Sillah centers on topics of memory, performance, and erasure as an act of care. She has presented her work at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art and has shown at thematic group exhibitions at the new Wight Gallery, Black Box Gallery, and the Black Image Center. Let's welcome Amie. Yay!
Is the mic good? Yeah. Okay, great. Hi everyone. First, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Brand Library for inviting me here to speak today and talk to you all about my art. I'm really excited. I'm going to be presenting some older work as well as some of my newer work and overall just sort of talking about my motivations as an artist. I am a visual artist with a foundation in photography, and today's talk will mostly talk about will mostly focus on my photo practice. So I wanted to start out first with this slide and just sort of give like an introduction, a little bit about me and how I grew up. I sort of grew up with a very active consciousness of images since I was very young. The picture over there on the left, right, is like 3 out of maybe 10 photo albums that my family has back home in New York. And they're like the older styles where it's like, they're like on cardstock and they, you sort of stick a photo into like this plasticky clear film. And that's like just a photo, I think, of me, one of my birthday parties and some of my family and friends. But yeah, I just grew up around a lot of image taking, and my family is from the Gambia. My parents were born there, half of my family was born there. And the Gambia is a very small country in West Africa with their own sort of history and engagement in photography. My father, for context, my father was a teenager when the Gambia gained their independence. And so that sort of the presence of photography pre and post-colonialism was very present, I feel like, in our family archive. And the use of image was used very differently, intentionally, both pre and post. And similarly in West Africa, like around the world, styles of portrait photography were used to desire to emulate and follow a history of portraiture and painting. So studio photography was a way to project desires of power and family, status, so on and so forth. And I'm really lucky because I have all these like beautifully amazing pictures of like my grandparents and elders that were taken in these studios in the Gambia. And it was definitely something that was, you know, not every family was able to do it. It was a luxury, needed to have the access and resource and time to be able to do it. But its importance, but it held significant importance really in being able to mark one's connection of family and existence in time. So the Gambia gained its independence, and similar to a lot of other countries in West Africa, the priority of portrait photography shifted. And the camera was literally brought from the studio to outside to document life. And there were definitely still a lot of advances in the studio. And we start to also see a broader expressions of identity and celebration in studio photography as well. But I sort of say all of this to foreground what my practice functions as to me. I was, fortunate enough to have such an extensive archive for reference, and it became very clear to me early on that there was this sense of urgency in documentation that my family held, and this sort of urgency of documentation and proof of existence and all of that really impacted and resonated with me very early on, and has and continues to impact my perspective when I make work. So so I just sort of wanted to put this little memento there. But to shift a little, I wanted to show some older work as well to ground and introduce some of my interest as an artist. Mostly because actually when making this presentation, I came to realize that thematically and visually, there were a lot of threads in my work that I made several years ago that I'm still making today. So these works, I believe these next two slides, are from the same series called Terrain. And these works here are on film. And early on in my career, I was quite interested and invested in photographing and displaying the body in ways that cause or prompt a viewer to think a little bit further about what does it mean to be an onlooker or a spectator, and why it's critical to be aware of that positionality in viewing work. Particularly also understanding that through an Afro-femme-centric point of view. And with this work and this work, which is Terrain 3, these works kind of ended up being a happy accident. I had film that was accidentally pre-exposed while I was traveling in a bunch of X-rays, and it was done at least like 4 or 5 times, and I was fully convinced that the film was done for, but I was also like broke and not gonna waste film. So I was like, okay, like I gotta make this work. I'm just gonna shoot on it and see, like when I develop it, what comes out of it. And the film ended up producing this incredibly beautiful, like grain filter that isn't natural to the film itself. And ended up being, that's a beautiful, happy accident. And I tried to recreate it a few times on purpose afterwards. So the next 2 slides after these are photo documentation following a performance piece I did early on during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. During then, I surveyed a bunch of people in my life and asked them about their unfulfilled desires at the time. I think that was really at the forefront of my mind as I was as well as all of us, were processing mass casualty and horror on like a horrific level that happened with the pandemic. And I had a bunch of things sort of swirling in my mind at the time. And I also think for me as well, I became so aware of my sense of touch, and both in a literal and a non-literal sense, and how threatening that felt. So I had laid out a bunch of sort of like homely domestic items like blankets and curtains and pillow sheets and pillowcases and sheets, and I'd put paint in different sections, and with sort of the words that people were sending me, and some people were sending me poetry and voice notes, and I took all of that and I compiled it and I recited it, and while and over those recordings, I took my body and started to paint the items on the ground with my body without using my hands. And this went on for several hours over the course of a few days. And then for the collaborators of the project, if they wanted a piece of it, I sent people off like the curtains and bed sheets, and I got really cool pictures of people putting the curtains out in their backyards, or using the pillow, well, not really using the pillow sheets, hopefully not, because they were covered in paint. But yeah, but during that process, I had stopped several times to take pictures and document it, and this is one of those pictures. It's from a series titled Contact Tracing. And for this one I believe was actually the second day I was doing this before I started. I had like a roll of film that was almost done, and I had a couple frames left, and I took this image before I started the second round of the performance next day. So then some time passes and I enroll in grad school, and grad school was an interesting time for me. It was transformative, I can say, in the least. But I struggled. And I think for me, the idea of performance and performativity was such at the forefront in my mind that I couldn't ignore it and not put that into my photo practice. And so I became really interested in investigating this idea of performance further. For me, sort of just as a line of thinking, I believe that we're all performers, reluctantly. Under oppressive systems and structures we live in, we're almost forced to perform identity. Like right now, I'm standing in front of you all, I'm giving this presentation, and I'm trying to perform what it means to be an artist and communicate that to you all. And then you as audience have an opportunity to verify that performance for me. But what happens when that verification doesn't happen, and when I'm not deemed authentic or real, or I'm caught to be a fake or a phony? So your validation gives me the green light to keep going in the validity that, yes, I am performing and I'm putting on, and then therefore that performance is affirming that I am true and real and authentic, and so on and so forth. And every day I'm performing what does it mean to be an artist, what does it mean to be a Black woman, what does it mean to operate under these structures, and I think that that's an anxiety that I constantly live with, that maybe many of us constantly live with, this idea that we'll be found out to be fakes. And I really became then interested in making images that then questioned authenticity and put performance at the forefront, particularly thinking about photography also as a medium that has a bias for being truth-telling. And I often try to, in my work, fight against that bias. So as I'm making and staging these works, my goal was to create a sense of doubt. And in that, through doubt, audiences are then able to project their own ideas and desires and hopes onto the works. So staging is really important to my practice. And I find that some of that inspiration with staging does come from these collections of this collection of images that I have of my family in this archive, and also a history of staging in West African photography. Certain props and body positions and compositions are all used to illustrate different stories and visually describe relationships to place, to family, to power, et cetera, et cetera. And this tradition of staging is still very prevalent today, and lots of photographers use staging as a theme or almost as like a secondary character to almost further illustrate themes that they're interested in as well. Yeah, and I enjoy that, and I think further about how this theme that we're used to in our visual language, this idea of staging, how I can use that to go along with my interests in performativity. So yes, I say all that to essentially ask myself these questions constantly. How can I stage an image effectively to not feel staged? And not in a way that's to mimic real life, but in a way to further cause confusion and further prompt questions. And for me, a lot of the staging is dependent on the people that I work with. I am very lucky to have some great friends who trust me to take images of them in really fun, interesting places and circumstances. But I also do work with people who are strangers, either to each other, if they're more than one person in an image, or to myself. And I find that that is also important for me, at least, in my practice, in terms of thinking about how far I can really push this game, this play of towing the line between what you're seeing is real versus what you're seeing is fabricated, made up or staged. And yeah, and also as an artist, I don't position myself as an expert when I go into these collaborations or these sessions that I take when I'm, working with people or photographing them. I usually actually spend quite some time with the people that I work with before I even pick up a camera, whether or not I know them really well, or they're someone that I met recently, or they're a stranger to me, or they're a friend of a friend, just to see how they naturally move and interact with the space, or with the environment, or with their partner. And usually out of that sort of waiting and observing, I'm able to notice certain ways that their body naturally behaves. And then through that, I'm able to rely on movements that would otherwise come natural to that person, and then use that to create a story or an image. So in a way, I don't think that I would, as an artist, be able to create the same image twice with different people. For instance, actually in this image, it's untitled, in parentheses, Amadou, titled after his name. These are two people who are very close to me. This is a cousin and my sister. And this actually was taken on a day of like a failed shoot, I say. What does failed mean? I guess that's a different definition to everybody. But for me, I had went in with this idea of a certain way that I wanted this collaboration session to go, and it didn't go that way at all. And he ended up scratching himself in the process because we were kind of like, rolling around in the ground and stuff. And my sister was there with us while we were shooting, and I can just see how she was naturally sort of tending to him. And she like naturally had her fingers positioned where her thumb was sort of elevated up because of her long nail, and I noticed that, and so I was already on my way to get him a Band-Aid, and I asked her, I said, can I just take a picture or two while you put this Band-Aid on him? And I only took like 2 frames, and I ended up with this one, and I don't think I would have been able to come up with the same image if I just wasn't observing how these two people that I've known my whole life interact with each other. Yeah, it's one of my favorite images. I love it. So this slide brings me to talking a little bit more about my current work and practice. In the last year, I've become a lot more reflective on grief and its relevancy in my work, specifically in the ways in which I hadn't really processed my grief or my relationship to grief at all. So a little story. I had a very close relationship with a family member who was really integral to my upbringing, and she helped raise me alongside my parents and my family. And her and I were very close, although we never really exchanged many words because there was a language barrier, but we really communicated our love through gestures. And she was family, so she was included in many of our pictures in our archive. And as she grew older, she began to contest her image in our in our family collection. And so she began to remove herself from it. It was a very slow and intentional process, and it was private to only me and her. And I remember as a young child, we often shared a room, and she would ask me late at night if I could bring her albums. And she would look through the album, she would take a picture of hers, and she would rip herself out of the photo. And then she would put it back, and she would ask me to put the albums back, and I'd put them back for her. And this went on for quite a few years. And she did it slow and very programmatically, because it was her intention to not get caught. And she did eventually get caught, but she got away with it for a long time. And she successfully removed herself from about, I'd say 90% of our archive. And so most of the images that we have left of her, ironically, are pictures that include me in them. And I'm not sure if she did that intentionally or if she was just kind of going in order. She was just, and I just kind of showed up towards the end of the archive. But she, pretty much removed herself from most of our family archive. And it would involve her ripping herself out of the images, or she would scratch her face out with a quarter. And, at my young age, I knew enough, almost just subconsciously, that what she was doing wasn't conventional or normal. But I also knew enough not to question it or share what she was doing with other people. And not in a way that, was to sort of be an obedient child, but more in a way where I understood that she was enacting control over her image and that she had that power. And I, now reflecting on it, feel pretty honored that she trusted me enough to bring me into that process. That really stuck with me, this ritual of removal that she engaged in for years. But I never really consciously thought about its impact on me as an artist until a few years ago. And that this experience with her kind of serves as a backdrop for my practice. So in the last year or so, I've been using my own practice to question and critique my entry into photography and how I engage with it. So the images that I'll be showing don't directly answer that question or talk to what she was doing. And I don't aim for my practice to do that right now. But I sort of see my practice as almost an example of that influence that event and those events had on me. And so almost intrinsically, I've been understanding some artistic decisions that I think felt pretty innate to me, and realized that they were actually a deliberate response to the shared experience that I had with her. And, to me, at first, I used to regard what she did as violent. I used to think of this as oh, that's really violent to be able to remove yourself and rip a picture of yourself up and intentionally do that and not want any trace of what you look like visually to be left once you leave this world. But now I sort of understand and realize that what she did wasn't violent at all, and also that for me personally, to view it as a violent act is to ascribe a certain kind of authority and power over photography that, and truth to the medium that I don't believe in, and I don't think she did either. And so I very quickly realized that her removal wasn't violent, but instead it was very careful, and that this was an act of care and protection that for her, she ritualized for herself, and in therefore involving me in the process by being observer, ritualized for me as well. And I kind of also think about the ways in which she's kind of been she used photography against itself. The images sort of no longer now serve as evidence that she existed, which is the way in which my family have been using and relied on an archive for. But instead it marks her rips and her tears, and her scratches left to now end up being a stand-in, not just for her, but for her resistance against that. And yeah, I also think, the marks that she left in the picture also further bring forth to me the questions that I was thinking about looking and seeing, and the relationship between image and viewer, and truth and fantasy, and ultimacy, agency. And so I realized that a lot of these questions have been operating in the background for me when I produce work. And so now I'm actively thinking about how can I create an equal relationship in consumption and viewing between artwork and viewer. And this question has kind of led me to this cropping that I have in most of my work. Most of the work is very heavily cropped and leaves little to no context for the viewers. And most of the time also in the work, the people in the work aren't engaging with the camera in a way that fully acknowledges its existence. I very rarely include images where you can get like a full view of a face, but if there is a direct gaze in an image between the viewer and the person in the image, it's intentionally used to try and further equalize that relationship in viewing. And I find that for me, the crop is almost like the crop is almost as important, if not more, than the content that I'm taking images of. Because to me, there's so much to be said about what's intentionally not included versus what is included in an image. And I also find that cropping helps to, like when context is limited from an image, I feel like it helps people to feel better about asking questions about an image because there's less things to rely on, to look at, to grab onto, to answer those questions for you. And so you're prompted to really think about what you're looking at, what dynamics are playing out in the image, and how that makes you feel. And when I actually think about what type of image I want to take, I want to create, this is also a very slow process for me. I think of these images as snapshots of random memories, some memories that I do hold from childhood, and some memories that are made up. But I enjoy relying on tapping into visual memories also as source material because of the unreliability of memory. I find that unreliability gives me freedom to be able to illustrate and choreograph my work in whichever way I desire, please. And, I bring up this idea of slowing things down in my work and working slower. And I think, in a weird way, the habits that I've picked up along the way are tactics that I use purposefully to slow myself down in the creation process. I find that photography is amazing because it is almost instantaneous compared to other mediums. And from idea to artwork or from idea to creation, that runway is a lot shorter than it is for, at least for me, that runway is shorter than it is for a lot of other artists. And there are times where in my practice, I really enjoyed that speed that comes with photography, especially digital photography. And now I really enjoy slowing down that impulse and lengthening the time between idea creation and then publishing or sharing that idea. And the works themselves aren't narrative. Each work holds its own sort of internal psychology, and the works themselves are purposely ambiguous in subject matter. And that's used, again, to hopefully prompt people who engage with the work to project themselves into the work to complete its meaning to them. And there are other things as well that I use to enhance that viewing relationship, like size and shape. So I believe these next few slides are probably my last slides, so I'll wrap up here. But I wanted to include a few images of how these works look installed. They're fairly on the larger side, like I listed the sizes around 40 by 40 or 50 by 40. And I find that having these of similar size and shape also helps to equalize not just the viewing relationship between audience and artwork, but also equal the hierarchy that doesn't exist really in my practice between the works that are in the room. Yeah, and I'll conclude my talk there. Now in my work, as I continue to use my family archive as a resource, the one question that sort of stays in my mind that will be prevalent in my practice beyond photography, but also in other mediums, for me really is thinking about how can removal and censorship function as an act of care. That's all I have for today. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate your attention. Yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation.
We'll just do a bit of a discussion, then open it up for public questions if y'all have any. Thank you again for your presentation. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I jotted down some thoughts and some notes on what you were talking about. It kind of goes from sort of like light to deep. But first off, I was curious. Well, you talked a lot about. Actually, this isn't in here, but at the end, you talked about moving into using your family's archive. But the shots are any of the shots of photographs? Or no. So like, are you thinking about doing that more literally, like using the source material as like a re-photograph? Or is it more like, are you creating scenes based on this archive?
Yeah.
Or are you still figuring that out?
You know, a little bit of all three. So I do have a work where I have an image that she ripped up, this family member, and I have a very small work. It's only 4 by 6 inches, and because I was the size of the original image, and I was pulled to using this image because I have such a vivid memory of her ripping that one up. And I have that image, and I completed it with an image with a self-portrait that I took of myself almost posing as her. And so I have attempted and have made work that directly calls out to the family archive, to the ripped images.
Right.
And I very quickly realized that wasn't the direction I wanted to go.
Okay.
Because I sort of realized that my role in observing what she did was not to then try and create an archive of someone who isn't alive anymore, who doesn't exist. And so I'm conscious of what does it mean for me to have this experience and use it as inspiration, but not try and recreate something.
Sure.
So I tried it and realized that didn't work, but I am interested in more sort of direct, like one-to-one references of images in my in the archive and seeing how that works. But I don't think that is something that'll manifest itself in photography. And I think it'll be something that I'll utilize with a different medium.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's also interesting your different takes on like what she was doing over the years. It kind of goes back to that sort of tricky relationship we have with memory.
Yeah.
And especially childhood memory, where it's like, I mean, I don't know, just thinking about like my own family, where you can sort of like narrativize someone as a hero or a villain, and sometimes, and most often, they bounce back through both. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. That like, because heroes have a lot of villain in them, and villain have a lot of hero in them. You know, they're kind of like every cop is a criminal type stuff.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting too to hear that it won't be directly tied to that work, because I would imagine sometimes when you have like such a big story like that, it's so much of a front load of information that it's like you end up explaining somebody else's choices instead of talking about your own, and it's like, well, it's not really your job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I quickly realized I'm like, the work isn't about her. It's about my relationship to
what that was like.
To what that meant to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just try and make sure I keep the work grounded in that and remind myself of that. Yeah.
Right. And this is sort of one of the lighter ones. Like, how do you navigate? 'Cause this is one thing that always kind of blows my mind about figurative photography, because it gets into this whole element of directing people.
Yeah.
Which I never do, and sounds horrifying to me. Well, I guess I do it in this job sometimes, but not in like my own practice, really. Like, so at least not in like that kind of a way where it's like the subject matter of my work.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit like about that? Is it fun? Is it awkward? Can it be all those things? Like how is that for you?
Yeah, I think it can be all those things, and I think there's an element of just like embracing the awkward that you have to have. Like, I have some images that are like in people's faces.
Right.
And like the camera, like I use a very short lens, so it's in people's face. So there is like general awkwardness with that. And I think, I talked about it that for me, my art practice isn't just about like the work that I create, it's the relationships that I create through it too.
Right.
And I think I've been able to have a lot of fun through the process because I have amazing people that I collaborate with who are just like down for the awkwardness and down for, being directed in a certain way. But there's not a lot of direction. I call it choreography because I feel like it's less directing than like choreography in my work, because I sort of take the way people naturally move and just enhance it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that for me was kind of a way for me to like not feel as awkward as a photographer and like directing people, because I'm also not like, I don't want to be like, do this, do that, but
well, there's this sort of like narrative or discourse in photography about like the ethics of figurative photography, right? And like the role of like, I'm the director and you're this, and there's this like power relationship. But I do think that sometimes that oversimplifies the whole experience. As someone who has been like used in a photo shoot, it can also just be very fun.
Yeah.
You know, and like lots of people have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, if things are creepy, then things are creepy. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But like, it's not like an inherently, there are issues, but it doesn't necessarily have to be inherently bad.
Yeah. It doesn't always have to be transactional.
Yeah.
And I feel like, a lot of it is like, and I tell this to people that I like mentor, or like, I've gotten great advice from mentors along the way, or like students I teach. I always tell people that like, there's so much also in the care that you give with people that you work with. Like, you should have like a system of like treating the people you work with like people.
Yeah,
like,
with respect.
But with respect and making people comfortable. Like, I bring snacks and music, and I like offer to take people home and stuff. And it's just, I talk about in my work a lot about trying to make things equitable, like viewing relationships. And I also have that approach also when I'm like going into working with people, that I'm also conscious of like, how much of me am I putting into the work versus what I'm getting out of someone from the work too. And I'm always conscious about like trying to make sure that things feel comfortable and equal, so on and so forth. But it is always a question that comes up in photography, definitely more than like other art mediums, about like the ethics of it all,
Yeah. Well, I feel like having a sense of self-awareness is like a lot of the battle, because you can't ever do anything perfectly, and you can't manage necessarily everyone's interpretation of any singular event, but as long as you're like being conscious, that's kind of what we can expect from each other. I also wanted to talk, and actually this kind of goes into another thing that I was thinking about, which is that in a lot of your work, and I don't know if I'm projecting this onto it or if it's something that's like being transmitted through the work, but there's this palpable sense of like tenderness. Sometimes it's literal. I think the Band-Aid is like a very literal literal application of tenderness, but even in things that aren't necessarily inherently, like the act is not necessarily tender, there does seem to be like a lot of care. Is that something you're trying to convey, or is that something that you're like maybe naturally just bringing to it through your own personality? Is that something that you're wanting to give a sense of in the work?
I think that's an interesting question because it's not necessarily something that I'm consciously including in the work, but it is something that comes up for people. But I think because of the nature of the work and that it allows people to project onto it, there have been people who've told me that they feel things that feel threatening in the work to them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like this image with the young girl, like I've had people tell me that that feels like a very authoritative gesture to have like this large hand over a girl's head. And I've had people tell me the exact opposite, that it feels very tender and very caring and comforting. So I don't know. I almost feel like I feel like a lot of sort of emotions that can be evoked from the work are almost like two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And I always enjoy like what emotions are like brought out of people when they look at the work.
Well, I feel like vulnerability always sort of brings out this kind of double set. For some people, vulnerability is tenderness, and for other people, vulnerability is possible danger. You know what I mean? It's like very sort of like Levinas, like the face is that which prompts me to kill and not to kill. Like it's this sort of like vulnerability, it just reads differently to different people, and it also reads differently based on like what you've recently been through in your life, the mood you're in that day. You know what I mean? The same image could read differently to one person just based on what's going on with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also have had the case where like the same image will read so differently depending on how it's cropped. And like, that's why I crop so heavily and take out all context so that the work, I mean, no work is, I think all things, just because I'm a person creating work, everything has a bias, but I almost try to eliminate a work having a certain tone already ascribed to it, like through the crop. So yeah, I agree. Like a lot of people will approach, like I've had people come into my studio and they'll see something cropped one way and then they'll come back like 2 weeks later and it's cropped a completely different way, and it brings out a completely different emotion out of them.
Right.
Yeah, and I love that.
Yeah, like if that girl, if it was cropped out more and there were lots of other people there, maybe that would make it less menacing because it's like, oh, she's not alone. Or maybe it's more menacing because maybe she's in timeout and that's why it's like, go over there, you know what I mean? You did something wrong. You just never know. Yeah. And then I also wanted to ask about your color choices. They're pretty high contrast, striking. How are you thinking about that? Like, how are you thinking about like levels of exposure, the contrast levels? Some of them are black and white, but some of them have like, thinking of the one with the man with the really bare chest, it's like a striking orange. So how are you thinking through those things? Yeah,
a couple different ways. For the black and white works, actually, that is a very like, I work with black and white in a very specific way consciously because I remember growing up as a student and the way that I was taught to shoot black and white film and expose was to expose for the highlights and the midtones and ignore the shadows. And I was told basically like, you know, that film naturally, the way it's made, discriminates against the blacks of the film. And I think about that phrase not just as like technically and literally that film is made to not pick up detail in the shadows and that you as a photographer have to go above and beyond to pick up what's in the shadows. But I also think about that as just like a theory of like, what does that mean for me as a black artist? And so I, you know, just remember being young and having to go above and beyond and teach myself essentially like how to shoot for black skin on film.
Right.
And for me, when I'm shooting black and white, whether it's digital or film, I always prioritize the darks of the photo. And that has led me to this sort of like visual language I've developed in my work where I have these like high contrast, rich black and white photos. And so most of my practice is black and white. And a lot of that is also because I learned on film first and I always have a love for film. And I find that with cropping and with trying to eliminate as much context as I can, that working in black and white also helps to eliminate context as well, because there's not color to rely on to also tell a story. And
yeah, there's more emotional associations
yes,
with color generally.
yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And so to like strip all of that forces you to think more about the image and ask further questions. And then when there is an image in color, it's something that for me that the color almost like vibrates or has like its own life, or it feels like it can carry another sense in itself. Like, like I've heard from folks that like the color works feel like they have a heat to them or a temperature. So the color works are very special to me when I make work, because I almost feel like they're like annotations within the black and whites.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you were talking about narrative projection and blackness, like racially, because when you think about it, if you're going into a photo gallery and all the images are of black people, that in and of itself often creates a narrative for people. And but because
and all these like associations.
Yeah, totally.
And,
All these types of
you know,
associations, like which really you've taken out so much of the context. Like the viewer, you can really only be your associations with blackness that are doing that.
Yeah.
Because there's not really any narrative to rely on to create those associations otherwise.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to confront that.
Right.
Because I think a lot of that is rooted in, you know, in fears. And that's why I work the way I work, because I am trying to, and I hope that people feel first invited to look like these are like attractive looking images, and then they're prompted to stay to confront what comes up for them when they look at the work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be like it's sort of like a push-pull between othering and familiarity.
Yes.
You know, because it's like, it's this specific racial othering, or a race that is often otherized, right? But then at the same time, the photographs are so intimate, and they're like of like people like everyone hugs. Do you know what I mean? Or like someone being touched in a certain way that's very familiar. So it's this interesting push-pull between those two things.
Yeah, and I think that's because my practice is rooted, although my practice is rooted in very personal, specific things, it aims to be communal. And so I think because of that push and pull, like because of just the nature of that, it's almost like a lot of sort of like, a lot of these sort of like viewing contradictions are set up for themselves, which I love and I embrace,
Very cool. Well, I think that's a good time to turn it over to any questions that y'all have in the audience. Don't be shy. We love questions and your brain.
No, it's just a hat. I was having a bad hair day.
That wasn't my real question. It's interesting that you keep using the word crop, because when I think of composition and framing, I think of those two words. And when I think of the word crop, I think of a post-production process where I have an image of a certain size and I'm removing information from that image by cropping it. So I'm wondering, are you using the word crop interchangeably with composition and framing, or are you using it very specifically because you're describing a practice where you're actually removing imagery from the original negative or
Oh, that's a good question. Mostly the latter. So for me, I'm one of those photographers that I embrace the post-production of it all. I love it. I feel like that is a secondary layer to really be able to bring work to life. And for me, when I'm making work, I'm consciously thinking about the framing as I'm taking images, and I'm thinking about what I want to crop as I take an image. So I'm almost cropping while I'm taking it. But there is a process after that where there's usually more information that I cut out, because I find that there's always more information that I can cut out. And I oftentimes have to force myself to pull back a little, because if it was up to me, like I would crop things even further. And yeah, so it's a little bit of both, but I go into works thinking about composition and framing, especially framing, because in something I didn't talk about, but in most, if not all, of the works, maybe except for honestly, with the exception of that one, of the little girl, the people themselves frame the work. So there's usually a body part that's touching each corner, each side of the work. So that's just a sort of like a visual thing that I include in all of my work. So that's something that I'm thinking about. And then the idea of the crop is something that happens sort of in the post-production of it. Yeah, thank you. Great question.
I know there's another question out
Where'd
there.
you go to grad school?
UCLA.
And you talked about it, I'm just talking because no one's right.
Yeah, I love it.
Which I'm in grad school now, and no one raises their hands, so I know where I'm going.
Oh, nice. Wait, where are you going?
Cal State LA.
Nice.
So did you study Kappa Nopi?
Yes.
And what was hard about it? You said it was challenging. So part of it you liked it, you thought it was challenging. And that might be too personal question, but as a fellow grad student, currently a grad student, I'm always curious to hear what were some of those challenges? How did you overcome them? What were the good things?
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, I was very grateful for the mentorship that I had. Like, yeah, I got to work under Kathy Opie, and she was amazing, and she was really instrumental in making me feel really great that first year of those years of grad school. For me, it was just hard because I was just experiencing life and so many things. I had a lot of changes at the time. Like, I moved cross country to a city that I wasn't familiar with and started school, and just like the natural growing pains of having to kind of feel like I'm starting all over again. And also, I think for me too, what I had a hard time with, which is what I think really led me to thinking about performance, was I was really comfortable with how I had my own art practice and operated outside of school. And then I had to understand, what does it mean for me to continue that art practice, but under this institution of the MFA program, and what does that mean for me? And that was a transition that, was difficult, but I think it led me to the work that I have now, so I'm grateful for it. But for me, I would say that's what were some of the challenges, just life growing pains, and then trying to understand the context of my art practice in a very different context, in life context for me. Yeah. Yeah.
And also studying photography in general is difficult in the art world.
Yeah.
Because very few people have the vocabulary to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a newer medium, so newer,
It's only 100 plus years.
Right, compared to painting, so, or sculpture, so yeah.
Well, I think with photography, so now that we're talking about grad schools, I went to Cal Arts, and it's the only medium that they have a separate degree for. Really? There's the art degree, which is if you're a painter, sculptor, all these things, then you just get the art degree, an MFA in art. But if it's photo and media, and I think it has a lot to do with what we were talking about, the particular history and ethical implications of photography through time.
Yeah.
But then also, it's a very technical medium. It's not, photography is an interesting medium because everyone's a photographer and very few people are photographers at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's I would imagine a big discourse in photography right now, is the fact that everyone's taking pictures all the time.
Yeah.
And what does it mean when technology and cameras are developing at such a rate? Mm-hmm. What do they lose? What do they keep? Digital and film is a whole, there's 3 French philosophers right now writing their thesis, going to be turned into a book on it right now about and so
yeah, and they're cooking,
so there's a lot with the history of photography and the contemporary culture around photography that's very specific to the medium.
Yeah.
But is there any other questions before we wrap up? All right, well, let's give another round of applause for Amie. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Also, it's closed now. You might be able, we kind of got to get out of here, but There is an exhibition up here for PST that we did in conjunction with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Very cool. And it's going to be up through, I think, January. So check it out at some point. And thanks again for coming.
Thank you.